All right, so let me just start with confirming, you are Ralph Clark and CEO of ShotSpotter Inc.
Mm-hmm.
And the business is based in Oakland, California.
Actually, it's based in Newark, but it's in the East Bay area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, about 30 miles away
Newark,
from
California.
Oakland. Newark,
Not
California.
Newark,
right.
New Jersey.
No, the other Newark.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, describe for us what ShotSpotter does.
So ShotSpotter provides a acoustic gunshot detection and alerting surveillance technology or service that we sell to police departments and cities. And what the system does, it uses sensors, wireless networks, and software. We deploy sensors in these sensor arrays of like kind of 20 to 25 sensors per square mile, effectively kind of creating a dome of protection, if you will. And the sensors are designed to ignore ambient noise, but to recognize and timestamp impulsive noises, pops, booms, and bangs, like gunfire as an example. So think about a gun being fired. That pop, boom, or bang sound will emanate out, and it'll hit multiple sensors at different times based on the location of that sensor. And so we're able to take that timestamp information and that location information from at least 3 sensors. We require a minimum of 3 sensors, but oftentimes as many as 7, 8, or 9, or 10 sensors often can participate in a solution. We're able to take that time differential and mathematically calculate the exact location of that pop, boom, or bang event. Then we go through a couple of classification steps, both a machine classification step and a human review step, where people are listening to and looking at these alerts in real time before publishing anything that is got a high likelihood of being a gunshot. And so when they hit the publish button, that alert will then be sent to a subscribing police department, basically showing a dot on a map with some description of the event in terms of location, the address location, number of rounds, the actual recording snippet, and the like. And this is all happening within 30 to 45 seconds of the trigger being pulled. And what makes the service so compelling from a law enforcement point of view is, I mean, sadly, 90% or more of gun violence goes unreported. It's become so normalized in many of our communities that when guns are fired, people don't call 911, which means there's no police response. And of course, if you don't have a police response, you can't have any kind of intervention or investigation and the like. And that is not a way to prevent and reduce gun violence. So we like to believe that we're equipping police departments to be much more accountable to and responsive to following up on incidents of gun violence in the long run, prevent and reduce gun violence.
I remember you were a participant in the Urban Entrepreneurship Symposium in Detroit back in 2015, a panelist there. And one of the main things I remember from that is the notion that you have a lot of gunshot events, and if a lot of gunshot events for each one that actually ends up, hitting somebody or murdering somebody. But if you can know where those events are taking place, you can preemptively act to reduce that kind of activity. So that was kind of an eye opener for me. And you're not just responding in the case that somebody got shot. You can actually prevent people from getting shot.
Exactly. I think what people tend to think about when they think about gun violence is gun violence equals homicides. But in fact, gun violence is a lot bigger than that and frankly, much more impactful. I mean, certainly homicides are critically important and damaging. But, living in communities where there's ongoing persistent gun violence that creates a unsafe space for folks is also quite damaging economically, physiologically, psychologically, et cetera. And it's the case that our work, we've learned that it's very few people that drive most of the gun violence, which makes it a very solvable problem. So we like to say that the reason you respond to and investigate today's shooting is so that you can prevent next week's homicide. Because they're the same folks that are involved. They're firing their gun all the time. And it's very unlikely that when you do have a homicide, that's literally the first time that gun's been fired. It's been fired multiple times before, and it will be fired multiple times after the fact. And so you really need to get in front of it as much as you can. And you can only do that by responding to and investigating all gunfire.
So do I understand the company went public, I think, last year?
We went public in 2017, June of 2017. So we've been public now for 2.5 years or so.
On NASDAQ?
3 years. On NASDAQ, yeah. So SSTI
Yeah.
is the ticker.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how's the company doing overall?
So we're doing great. We have a lot of work to do, sadly. I think when I joined the company back in late 2010, we had about 25 or so customers. We're now up over 100 customers. We have global ambitions. This is a technology that can be effectively used by agencies in other parts of the world besides the U.S. So think South Africa, think Latin America, think the Caribbean. In fact, we have a deployment in the Bahamas, and we're in South Africa, we're in Cape Town, and now we're getting ready to be in Nelson Mandela Bay. We've got some active pursuits that are taking place in Mexico and Colombia and Brazil, which is really quite exciting. And we've been able to be profitable for the past several quarters too. So we're a SaaS-based recurring revenue model, which is really important. We tend to like to be able to capture a customer engagement and hold that relationship over a very long period of time. And because it's a SaaS service, it's profitable at the gross margin line, which then kind of produces gross profit that can sustain our operating expenses and then leave a little bit of extra profit left over. So that's really encouraging for us. And we're able to be break even on a $10 million quarter, which is pretty unusual for a SaaS recurring revenue business model. Typically, people aren't profitable until they're at like 50, 70, even $100 million a quarter, because they're spending so much money in customer acquisition, customer creation costs, R&D, et cetera. And we just don't have to do that for the nature of our business.
And you were deployed in Detroit, I think, back when we had...
We were, yes. And we recently responded to an RFP that Detroit issued. We're hoping to hear word on that hopefully any day now. We'd love to be back in Detroit because it has a problem we think we can help with.
Okay. Well, tell me about yourself. Give me a little, I met you back in 2015, but I'd never heard your story. So I'd like to know that.
Yeah, that was a good time that we had. I enjoyed my time with you guys back at that conference, or symposium. So my story, and I'll try to keep it brief. I was born and raised in Oakland, California, which is where I live mostly. I've split my time between Oakland and Seattle now, and went away to school, but started my early professional career here in Seattle working for IBM. I was a marketing representative for what was then called the Data Processing Division. And this was the organization within IBM that sold mainframe computers, which probably for your audience, let me describe that. There's these big old hunky things that sat on top of raised floor and like, it's like way back in the olden days. You and I can remember it. I'm very sure none of your students will have any clue what we're talking about. So maybe they'll have to do a Google search and look at a mainframe computer. But these were typically in the purview of large corporations. In fact, I was on the Boeing team, which at the time was IBM's probably third or fourth largest account. And very quickly, I assumed responsibility for a couple of data centers within Boeing, their Kent Bellevue data center, their Kent and Bellevue data centers, which was the vast majority of all the revenue that Boeing was contributing to IBM at the time. These were complex sales, involved a lot of financial analysis. Again, back then, this was in the early 80s. A customer might, stroke a $2, $3, $4 million check for a computer. In fact, I remember there's this external storage device at the time called DASD, which is direct access storage disk. And it was about the size of a Sub-Zero refrigerator. For some reason, this is etched in my mind. It, at the time, I think the cost was somewhere between $85,000 and $100,000. And it carried a whopping 2.52 gigabytes of storage. And again, it was the size of a Sub-Zero refrigerator. And we sold a whole bunch of those to Boeing along with the mainframe computers. But anyway, worked at IBM for almost 8 or 9 years, got a couple promotions, went to the large systems marketing staff, then popped out as a marketing manager. I was a high potential candidate, so I would go to these things that IBM would sponsor from time to time called the President's Class. And that's where they would take you. In this particular case, we went back to Harvard Business School and had a 2-week class for other high potential candidates within IBM, and got really excited about doing case studies and the like. Was my first exposure to a case study, and they were going really deep into financial analysis and the like, which was important in the job I had, but it was more of a secondary skill than a primary skill, because really you're about kind of trying to sell the technology, and then we use financial tools to be able to help the sell. But I just really enjoyed finance and enjoyed my experience in Boston, and decided that I was going to apply to business school. I applied to one business school, Harvard, and if I was fortunate enough to get in, I would go, and I was. And so I ended up going to Harvard Business School, and then while in school, thought I even wanted to go further into finance, because I felt I had a lot of experience in sales and marketing, and wanted to complement that skill with more kind of financial and financing rigor. So I went to work on Wall Street for about four or so years, worked with Goldman Sachs and then Merrill Lynch, before moving back to the Bay Area to pursue working as a high-tech, high-growth entrepreneur. And I've been doing that now since the late 90s.
How did you become associated with ShotSpotter?
So I had been the CEO of a company called Guardian Edge, which was acquired by Symantec in a fairly high-profile acquisition. So my name popped up on a headhunter's screen, and because it was a pretty successful exit for everybody involved. And so I got a call. And the interesting thing was, being born and raised and living in Oakland, California, I was somewhat familiar with ShotSpotter, because ShotSpotter had been deployed in Oakland. And I actually knew a couple people that worked at Oakland PD. And so I, on a flyer, decided I would go by and check it out, because I was just curious about the technology. I guess I'm an optimist kind of tech geek that way, although I had at the time no real intentions of working at a company that sold technology to a police department. Because, I mean, what did I know about selling to a police department? Not much. So I ended up coming down and visiting with the company, and just immediately got connected to the founder in a very, I would say, deep connected way. I mean, he's an incredible, his name's Dr. Bob. He's the founder of the company. And he's an incredibly brilliant mathematician and physicist. And he had been doing work at a place called the Stanford Research Institute, using math to calculate the locations of earthquakes and Soviet Union missile testing. And because he's an equally super beautiful human being, he became concerned about a local gun violence issue in the Bay Area. And he thought that he could apply these same math principles acoustically to be able to identify the location of gunfire and then alert police to it so that they could respond. So he quit his, classic Silicon Valley way. He quit his very comfortable job at Stanford Research Institute without any notion of, like how he's going to price this thing or sell it or whatever. What's that?
When was that? What year was
this? Was so we're 20 years old. So this is about 20 years ago. So this is in 2000, and maybe 1999 or so. He got a couple of other MIT PhD math PhDs to join him, and they basically cobbled together their first prototype to show that it could work. And then they, cobbled together some other systems, and I think within 3 or so years came to the attention of their first institutional investor, who then invested in the company, and they were kind of off to the races. Although in, the life cycle of technology companies is very interesting, because what happens to a lot of technology companies, they'll have an immediate success selling to early adopters. And early adopters are the folks that, price is no object, technical friction is zero. I mean, the more technical, the better, the more complicated, the better, the higher the price, the better. This is almost the way Boeing was. It reminded me of Boeing actually in the day. It's just like, they were just always out on the leading edge of things. Now, the problem is in technology lifecycle adoption, that those early adopters are very interesting, because they can help launch your company, but there's very, very few of them. And like, once you burn through them, or you capture like 100% of them, you have to figure out how to make your solution relevant to folks where price is much more of a consideration. Technology friction represents risk. They don't like to buy things, they like to buy solutions and outcomes. And that's exactly where I found the company when I started my conversation with them in 2010. I saw an incredibly powerful technology that was trapped within early adopting police departments. And when I was doing my due diligence, talking to many other police departments, it was very clear they had an equally challenging issue around gun violence, but they just didn't have the financial resources or technological sophistication to adopt the solution as it was currently sold and marketed. So I became intrigued with the idea and say, hey, this is a company I think I can make a difference in if they'd be willing to support me in radically pivoting the business model and pricing construct and how we went to the market by, at the time we're charging $250,000 a square mile and then $40,000 a year annual maintenance. And we're asking customers to take ownership of, a bunch of sensors and standing up networks and standing up a server in their environments and maintaining all that stuff. Yeah. Again, like Boston, San Francisco, they could afford to do that. Maybe Oakland on the edge could because they were a customer. But, Birmingham, Alabama, Miami Gardens, Peoria, Illinois, places like that, there's no way they're going to go to their city council and ask for $1 million to deploy 4 square miles of ShotSpotter. So I got the board and investors to back this business model pivot, which would have us go to the market in a very different way as a managed services subscription-based business model where we take the risk and ownership of deploying, maintaining, and owning all of the infrastructure out there to help create the service. Yeah. And then charge an affordable, at the time we started $40,000 per square mile per year, basically the maintenance costs of our previous business model. And so now a person, instead of going to their city council asking for $1 million, they could go to their city council and ask for $160,000 for year one. Now, the bet that we were making is, because we wouldn't make any money in year one, the bet we had to make is that we could keep that relationship for 10, 15, 20 years. Because we weren't going to break even until years 2 or 3, and then we weren't going to break even that much, and then year 3 gets better, et cetera. So that was the bet the company played. But I was convinced that in doing so, I thought once we got in, we could prove our relevance and value add. B, 2, that we could effectively cross the chasm to more of the, instead of the early adopters, I describe these folks as the early majority folks that be willing to take that calculated risk. It's a much different calculated risk than the early adopters are willing to take. And so that's what helped us kind of grow the business from, 25 or so customers to over 100 customers where we are today, be profitable, go public, get our capitalization all right. And we've done a tuck-in acquisition. So we're extending the platform beyond acoustic gunshot detection to do more machine learning, big data oriented things to help police departments allocate their resources more effectively and, expand globally and stuff. So it's been an interesting process.
Mm-hmm. So a city, maybe a middle-ish sized city might pay like $140,000 a year for the service. Yeah. How does that prove in for them financially, or does it prove in financially?
So it's proving out pretty well because the cost of not responding to gun violence is pretty significant. Police departments take on a mandate to serve and protect, and you can't validly claim that you're serving and protecting the community and not showing up to 90% of gunfire incidents. I mean, it's just that simple. And so we help enable that in a real way. And it's fortunate for us because this whole conversation, I'm sure we're going to get to defund the police, Black Lives Matter, and the like. But I'm personally excited about that conversation because that conversation is a conversation we've always wanted to have, even prior to this tragic George Floyd incident. Is that police have to be much more accountable to serve and protect at-risk, underserved communities by not over-policing and underserving, but showing up in service, right? And unfortunately, what we have in too many of our communities are police that they're not responding to incidents for gun violence, but they're responding to a whole bunch of other things that are resulting in over-policing. And that posture creates the business case for distrust of police and communities. I mean, I understand this very well because I grew up in Oakland, is that when cops pull you over for a busted tail light or a outdated registration, right, and give you a ticket for it, but they're not showing up when someone fires a gun. That's just not, that's not a good look, effectively. That's something they would never do in an affluent community. You're in an affluent community, you're going to show up for gunshots. And you know what? If you see someone with a busted tail light, you're going to pull them over and you're going to say, hey, did you know you have a busted tail light? And the person says, no, I didn't know that. He goes, hey, you know, you need to get that fixed, man. Okay, thank you, officer. And they go off and do that. That's not how they police in our communities. And so we have to change that. We have to change that dynamic. And as scary as the defund the police moniker is, and I don't really think people literally mean defund the police, with maybe a few small exceptions. I think they're really saying that we want a voice in how policing is done in our communities. Yeah. And that's important.
Yeah. Well, from a straight financial point of view, though, dollars and cents with the business, if I look at the Ferguson model, you know, where they were doing a lot of busted tail light and this kind of thing, and fines and other fines on top of fines, you know, that brings in dollars. So they could say, you know, this might not be the right thing to do, but we're making a lot of money. So in the case of ShotSpotter, you know, if I'm putting the 140,000 over here, where is it coming from? How am I saving that on? What other budget item am I, where am I saving?
So the Ferguson model might have looked good until you had the riots and all the costs associated with responding to it. Yeah, it costs a lot more money than, I guarantee you, than they were collecting in those tickets and those over policing. But our business case is the following: it's hard to make a financial ROI case. I think it's more around a mission case that you make. He says, hey, look, you've taken an oath to serve and protect. Can you legitimately say that you're serving and protecting the community and you're not showing up to 80 to 90% of the gun violence? I mean, that you can't do that. And what police need in order to be effective is they have to have community trust, and they have to have legitimacy in the eyes of the community. Otherwise, they're not policing, they're occupying force, which is terribly expensive. You need more police. They're going to be a lot less effective. Despite what we see on the TV with CSI, whatever, where technology and really smart police solve cases, that's in the real world, it doesn't work that way. The way cases get solved is someone in the community, there's someone that comes forward and provides that last little bit of information required for you to make that intervention or that arrest or make that case. If a community doesn't trust you, you're not getting that kind of intel. You're just not getting it. People are less cooperative. They're less trusting. And frankly, your police officers are less safe in those environments. So what we say is, look, the path to, and there's no magic bullet, no pun intended, but I mean, the path to getting that legitimacy and community trust is to show up in service precisely, be intel-led, use precision policing. Communities don't need to be policed. Criminals need to be policed. And if someone fires a gun, that's a criminal act. That's what you need to respond to. Mm-hmm. And over time, when the community sees that type of response, and you're appropriately knocking on doors and checking to see if people are okay because you're there as a guardian, you can change that trust and legitimacy framework to your advantage, where now all of a sudden your job becomes a lot easier because people are proactively engaging you before things get out of hand or before there's a problem. That's how you prevent and reduce gun violence, is by having that strong community sentiment and changing the relationship between police and your police, changing the relationship between police and the community that they're meant to protect and serve.
So in terms of who you guys are serving, your customers are these local governments?
Yeah, the buying center, I would say it's a complex sell, first of all. So the person that is the primary buying center for us is the police department, typically the chief, deputy chief, assistant chief, and the like. Although we understand we have to kind of coordinate a lot of folks to weigh in and say yes and be supportive. So that could be elected officials. Increasingly, it's becoming community that are demanding a police department be more responsive to preventing and reducing gun violence. So although the technical customer for us is the police department, we basically sell to a much broader constituency.
Yeah. Okay. And so what does that selling process look like and the sales cycle?
Yeah, too long. Yeah, I mean, but appropriate. I mean, so it's It's a long sales cycle. I mean, so it's generally we talk in terms of kind of 12 to 18 months. In some cases, it could be longer. It's interesting in that when we have a Ferguson situation or like the George Floyd situation, we see a little bit of uptick in activity, and we see those sales cycles to collapse a little bit, because I think what happens is police departments become more reflective around what they need to do operationally different to be more effective, to be more trusted, and the like. So in the past couple of months, in fact, we've seen some really interesting deals kind of come over the transom, that where people have the money, they're already, you know, aware of our capability, and they're saying, hey, I got to get going on this right away. So now we're not expecting that to take place long term, but it is interesting to see that when you have events like this, that it can collapse the sales cycles. But generally speaking, this is a complex sell, and customers will, they'll typically, we've taken up the pricing a little bit now. So the lowest price that we'll typically do something is like 3 square miles at $70,000 a square mile. So it's really more like $200,000, $250,000 a year that we're asking someone to write a check for us to be able to deploy across 3 square miles or so.
Do you use a direct sales force, outside sales force, inside sales force?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, this is a belly to belly because it's a complex sell. This is a, I would describe it as a belly to belly sale. So we have field sales directors that are one in the Northeast, the Southeast, the Midwest, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and then we have someone in the western part of the United States, and they're responsible for driving something on the order of, call it, 20 to 30 square miles per sales director per year. Some of those will be expansions to existing customers. Part of our go-to-market is, I would describe it as a land and expand strategy. So, you plop down your first 3 square miles, like in the case of Chicago. Chicago's expanded like 4 or 5 times over the past couple of years, and now they're over 100 square miles. A more likely scenario, someone would, deploy 3 square miles and then maybe expand to 5 square miles or 10 square miles over a couple of expansions. So those 20 to 30 square miles that those sales directors are getting each year, some portion of them will come from existing relationships where the customer wants to expand, and then there'll be the new city or new logo captures. Mm-hmm. We support our sales effort by having a little bit of an inside sales organization and, of course, a marketing organization. What's unique about our situation, which is really important to understand, and this is what enables us to be profitable on a $10 million quarter, is that unlike a lot of other enterprise software solution plays, they have to boil the ocean for customer discovery. Their solution is very broad. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, they're selling to companies that maybe compete with one another. So the idea of having a net promoter or reference sales and kind of enterprise sales is unlikely in most scenarios, because if you're a successful chief information officer of Bank A, you're not likely to expose your secret sauce capability to your competitor, right? So you tend to be very guarded. In our situation, it's the exact opposite. We don't have to boil the ocean because we know the police departments. There's about 1,400 cities in our TAM. We see them every year at different conferences, the International Associations of Chiefs of Police, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, major city chiefs, super efficient for us. So we don't have to spend a lot of money on marketing discovery. We don't even have to spend a lot of money to go see them, because they're conveniently all kind of coming together at these major conferences. So we can kind of show up once and sell to many. And then the most important thing for us, which is really, really cool, I think, and this is why I've become a big fan of something called NPS, or Net Promoter Score, and I think probably everybody in your class has had some exposure to this, possibly as a recipient, where you get asked a question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend this product or service to a friend or colleague? And what's beautiful about Net Promoter is that simple question has a lot of powerful meaning into it based on how people respond to it. So we pay a lot of attention to that. And what you want to do is get people to score you, and not fake score you, but because you're providing a great service and they see a lot of value in it. what your goal needs to be is try to get people to view your service as so critical and indispensable, and they feel so good about it that they're promoters, i.e. they score 9 or 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those people become, at least in our case, they become effective salespeople for our solution. And so we've seen in geographical tipping points, I would just say, so we've deployed successfully in one city in Ohio and created a net promoter in that deputy chief and or chief. Then all of a sudden, we're in the next 5 cities in the neighboring Ohio region, right? That's how net promoter works. And so that's a very efficient, low-cost way to get customers, is when customers are doing your selling.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really do rely on that. And that's why we're only, that's why we're able to get away with only having 5 sales directors and generate the kind of revenue that we generate.
Are any of those sales directors ex-law enforcement people?
Oh, yeah, great question. So the short answer is, on the sales side, we have one ex-police officer. The rest of them are more professional salespeople that have come from selling technology and solutions to law enforcement. But we have another part of the organization. This is all in support of our whole NPS Net Promoter strategy. Is we have an onboarding and customer success organization, because again, we sell on an annual subscription basis, which means customers have to have value in the service, because you want them to renew years 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, or whatever. So how they get onboarded and how they implement best practices on the use of your solution and reflect value back on that is extremely important to us. And so we've built an organization called our Customer Success Organization, which is made up of all ex-law enforcement professionals, very successful law enforcement professionals. It's led by more of a commercial person, because we're trying to bring them on and teach them consulting skills and how to adapt and move in a commercial environment versus working for a police department. So the leader of the organization is non-law enforcement, but the real practitioners and domain experts are former law enforcement professionals that all of them actually have prior ShotSpotter experience too, which is really important as well. So what we do with them is, when we capture a new customer, we bring on that resource to sit down with them. So it's more than selling them the solution. It's also helping them implement practices and policies on how to best use the system so that they're seeing value. And that way you're ensuring that A, they'll renew in years 2, 3, 4, 5, and beyond. And then B, hopefully become net promoters.
Mm-hmm. So that builds in some stickiness to the business between, the loyalty with the customers. What other kinds of things help to cement that relationship with the customer and keep them on the system?
Yeah, so I think what we find is we have, like I said, a long sales cycles, because I think the perception is with our solution, it's a nice to have, not a have to have. It's not a mandated technology, to be sure. And so, we have to work really hard to get people to, go through the mental math to figure out, okay, this is something that I can use to be effective in. Once we do that, though, as I mentioned, it's critically important that A, the technology works, of course, but then B, that the agency is using the technology in the way that drives positive outcomes. So what are positive outcomes? Positive outcomes are saying, okay, I'm comparing my ShotSpotter activations to my 911 calls. So that's low-hanging fruit for us. We know that we're going to be detecting and alerting on 100% of the gunfire. Your typical 911 call is going to come in maybe 10% of the time. And then when it comes in, it's going to be 3 to 5 minutes late, and there's not going to be a precise location to send officers to. So that's a real kind of low piece of hanging fruit that we make sure agencies understand this is what they're getting. B, you're measuring your response time. So now you can say, hey, my officers are getting to 90% of gunshot activations within 3 minutes. And this percent of the time, if they're not encountering a perpetrator or aiding a victim, they're able to recover physical forensic evidence in the form of shell casings, and that they're then going to run through this fingerprinting technology, which helps them investigate and connect the dots on who might be involved in the shooting. They'll be able to interview witnesses. Really important that they knock on doors and check to see if people are okay. We also encourage them to do a survey, do a community survey, kind of pre-ShotSpotter, post-ShotSpotter. In fact, Cincinnati did this. And what's really remarkable is the community says, okay, prior to ShotSpotter, I felt this way about the Cincinnati Police Department. Post-ShotSpotter, I feel this way. I like ShotSpotter. I would recommend other neighboring communities or neighborhoods get ShotSpotter. I have more trust in the police. These types of things, right? This is really critically important. So as they use it and use it the right way, they're getting value over it. It almost kind of sells itself in a way. And that's what you get those renewals on. We try to be thought leaders as well. I think our pricing, we don't have any direct competition, which is also very helpful. So we can kind of keep we don't compete with anybody, so we don't have to slash our price, nor are we trying to get overly greedy, even as effectively a sole source technology. Our internal philosophy, and this is what I learned at Goldman, which was interesting when John Warrenberg would come talk to the entering associates class. He says, at Goldman, he says, all investment banks are greedy, but what makes Goldman special is at Goldman, we're long-term greedy. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that talk because it's so strategic. And so like internally, we say we're long-term greedy. So could we price a little bit more? Probably, but that's not the play that we're in. What we want to do is price enough to cover our costs, make a fair profit. But most importantly, we want to keep that relationship 15, 20 years. Because if we're able to do that on a cumulative basis, we're going to do so much better than trying to extract maximum value out of one transaction. So we try not to be transactional, I guess, is the point there. And fortunately, we have the luxury to do that. And I think customers really appreciate that. We do our annual NPS survey every year. Like I said, really, really important. And again, it's more than just getting the score, it's getting the feedback too, and driving a level of intimacy with customers that makes them, again, appreciate the relationship. And I think when we talk to agencies, I'll say this humbly, it's like they're saying, ShotSpotter is my favorite vendor. In fact, we don't even view you as a vendor. We view you as a partner. I don't have my other technology vendors, bringing in that kind of customer success focus. They don't really talk to me about NPS very much or how I'm feeling. When I give them feedback, I don't see them respond in a different way. I think we just really try to lean in on this issue so that we can keep that relationship going for 20 years.
Tell me about this Incident Review Center.
Yes, thank you. So the Incident Review Center, I think I mentioned earlier that we go through a two-step classification process. So the machine can figure out, the sensors can kind of figure out when they collaborate with one another, okay, I think I heard something that might have been a gunshot. And then the machine will extract certain, we call it recipe information off of that pop, boom, or bang. And there's acoustic technicalities I can go into, but I won't. But it's like, how fast it rises and then detracts and the like. But we're able to extract out some recipe information from each of the sensors that heard that pop, boom, or bang. And the machine, for a percentage of those incidents, can say, I'm either 99.99% sure it's not a gunshot and then kill it, or I'm 99.99% sure it is a gunshot, in which case it'll immediately be published to the subscribing agency. Then there's all the stuff in the middle, right? That stuff in the middle is what gets reviewed by the Incident Review Center, which is think of it as a control room that where we have a minimum of 2 to 3 people working, and sometimes we can have as many as 8 to 9 people working if it's like during the summer on Friday when a lot of gunshot activity takes place. But these are the folks that are taking these real-time alerts, and they're listening to them, and they're also looking at them, and they're combining their listening skills along with their looking skills. And looking skills mean how they're looking at the waveform that's represented by that acoustic pop, boom, or bang. If you look at like a recording, it looks like it's a graphic representation of recording. It'll look like a sideways Christmas tree. So lots of energy here, and it'll taper down to a point like a sideways Christmas tree. So they're looking at those, and they're also looking at sensor participation and where the sensors are. So what makes that job easy? I mean, we try to make a very big deal out of it, but the fact of the matter is, because we have the sound and we also have this graphical representation and sensor participation, classifying gunfire is like really pretty straightforward. So here's the thing. It's like, oh, how do you figure out, gunshots versus fireworks? Well, here's a secret I'll let you guys in on, is that in our system, when you have fireworks, the sensors that participate in the solution, remember I said it takes a minimum of 3 sensors, and oftentimes we see as many as 8 or 9 participate. Firecrackers or fireworks, the sensor participation has like 360 degrees, right? So there might be 5 sensors and there'll be one north, south, east, west, like that. And it's almost like a perfect cylinder. Why is that? Well, let me explain what we see with gunfire. Gunfire, you'll see sensor participation going in a direction. And the reason is because the muzzle blast has the acoustic energy going in a direction, right? So the sensors, there'll probably be more sensors participating. They'll participate in a direction. And then the other thing, the real deal killer in terms of fireworks versus gunshots is, fireworks typically aren't going to be heard farther than a quarter of a mile to a half mile. Gunshots are going to be heard as far as a mile away. Now, it won't sound like a gunshot. It'll be just like a, because remember, we're listening for impulsive noise that sits above ambient noise. So, you put those things together, they'll listen to it. Okay, that kind of sounds like a gunshot. They'll look at the waveform. Okay, that looks like a gunshot. Let me see how the sensors participate. Oh, 8 or 9 sensors participating. They're all going in the southeast direction. The furthest one away is a mile. And oh, by the way, too, shooters make it somewhat easy too, because they're often shooting multiple rounds. So you hear the cadence of the shots. It's like, it's pretty simple. I mean, we'll try to say it's really hard so people don't try to replicate it. They'll appreciate the work that we do, but actually it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, interesting. So I actually think that I could make a case, a financial case, and maybe it's not politically savvy to do, but if I'm responding faster and if I'm reducing the overall amount of activity, if I can get one police car off of the system, as a result of that, there's my $200,000 right there. The officer.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, to my way of thinking. And oh, by the way, I mean, if you make one arrest, again, I think gun violence is a Pareto problem. And what I mean by that is, and what makes it a solvable problem too, is that fact it's a Pareto problem. If gun violence represented hundreds of people firing their gun a few times, this would be a really tough problem to solve, right?
Yeah.
But it's more like 5 people responsible for 60 to 70% of the gunfire.
Yeah.
This is true. They're called shooters. And it's funny because you hear them discussed in popular culture. You hear the term, I'm going to bring my shooter with me. I mean, there's a thing called a shooter. And I mean, this is the person that is the enforcer. And even though you might have a number of people be in criminal possession of weapons, right? A lot of people think of gun violence as like, well, if you're a former felon and you're in possession of a weapon, that's a really big problem. And to me, it's like, well, that's a problem. It's not a big problem. It's a big problem for the people that are shooters. I mean, I want the shooters. I want the person that's shooting. And so my point is that even when you're able to have a successful intervention with just 1 or 2 shooters in a neighborhood, that can make a marked difference in reductions of gun violence. Just taking that, taking 1 or 2 shooters off of the street is huge. It doesn't maybe look impressive. And I think, again, people are so focused on, following up on homicide cases. And in fact, really what you want to do is intercept that shooter before they hurt and kill somebody. So.
But just as an aside, are you guys in Flint?
We're not. We're not anywhere in the state of Michigan yet. But I expect Michigan will go very similar to the way Ohio and Illinois go as well. I think, certainly, I mean, Flint, Detroit, there's a Troy, Michigan too, isn't there?
Yeah, Troy is 5 minutes from where I am right now.
Yeah, I think Troy definitely is in need of something like that. So I think there's at least 3 to 5 cities in in Michigan, in the state of Michigan, that could successfully use ShotSpotter.
Well, I know the mayor in Flint personally, helped him on his campaign. I've known him since he was born. I'm going to send him a portion of this interview.
Oh, really? Oh, that'd be so nice. Thank you very much. Oh, so what? Oh, I think the other mayor, she's not Mayor Broom.
Mayor,
No, not Broom.
Karen Weaver.
Karen Weaver, yes.
Was defeated by Sheldon Neely.
Ah, okay, got it.
He was a state rep, and he was a council person, and he was my best friend. Was my next door neighbor in Flint. Sheldon was his nephew. He's my, so anyway, I've known him since he was born.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so
good. He's got a big job.
Oh, he's got yeah, and they need all the help with public safety that they can get over there. So I wanted to just to wrap up this whole area of the value proposition, just in a nutshell. What would you say the real advantage of having ShotSpotter is for these communities? How would you sum it up?
To prevent and reduce gun violence.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, and that's something that a lot of people want.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just that straightforward.
Yeah. So let's look at the revenue streams, and I'm not looking to get any proprietary. I know you're public now, so you can look up this kind of stuff. But if there's anything that's something you don't want to reveal, it's not a problem. We're just trying to get a general picture.
Yeah.
But what are the main revenue streams for the business? You mentioned this, the ongoing fee, the fee for the service. So
again, I think we guided Wall Street to a $44.5 million revenue year for 2020. We just completed Q2. Had our earnings call actually earlier this week, or maybe it was last week. They're all running together now, but we did $11.3 million in revenue for Q2. About 100% of that revenue is subscription revenue. So that basically represents the 100 or so customers that we have, over 700 square miles that we're charging on average, I think, from looking at all the blending pricing, probably about $60,000, $65,000 per square mile per year for that particular quarter. As we add new miles and do a good job managing attrition, hopefully it's zero, that number grows. That's just the way the math works. We'd like to think that we have long-term ambitions of kind of taking our, call it $45 million in annual recurring revenue. We would like that to be $100 million in revenue over the next 4 years. So we have fairly aggressive growth objectives in place. The way we get there is we double our domestic business from 100 customers to 200 customers. And cumulatively, we think in doing that, the domestic recurring revenue business will be about $85 million a year in recurring revenue by just adding another 100 or so customers, assuming they add five or so miles per customer. We expect our international business to go off a relatively low base. We think that could be a $10 to $15 million business. I'd mentioned earlier, we did a tuck-in acquisition of a kind of precision policing solution. We renamed or rebranded to Missions. It helps manage patrol resources and helps them be much more impactful. We think that could be a $5 million plus a year business. And then using the same technology that we use for the police departments for neighborhoods across 3, 5, 10, and as much as 100 plus square miles in the case of Chicago, we can apply that same technology over a campus environment. And that we call our secure campus solution. We're deploying about 10 college campuses to date, including UC San Diego, UC Berkeley, California School, Berkeley, and some other schools, a few HBCUs, University of Alabama, et cetera. We think that security business can be a $5 million a year business at scale. And I think that will increasingly include corporate businesses, because one of the things that we're seeing now with the whole defund the police movement is we're seeing a lot of commercial entities understanding that they're going to probably have to take on much more of their own protective posture. and they can't completely rely on the police department to do that. So you think about large kind of big box retailers like the Walmarts of the world. I think if you track, what happens in and around their parking lots, I mean, there's probably not a day that goes by where something's jumping off on one of those places. So having immediate, a quick alert to notify people of someone firing a gun, and maybe panning, tilting, zooming cameras to that location is a very valuable service. So you put all that together, that's $100 million a year. We think it's a 70% gross margin, adjusted EBITDA 45% plus. We've talked to the street about this, so that adjusted EBITDA number is a good proxy for cash. So generating $45 million a year cash and $100 million business, I think is pretty attractive. So
yeah. Any other potential revenue streams? What about, for example, selling this data? Is it? I mean, I realize that might be small, but you're collecting a lot of interesting data.
Yeah, so we collect a little bit of modest revenue on selling data today. That could be bigger. I think we've always had ambitions that if we collected a lot of endpoints, that data could really help inform a lot of policy decisions at the federal level. I think we just need an administration in place that would care about something like that. I'll leave that there, but that's very much a possibility. Yeah.
Okay. And so then what about on the cost side of things? What are the main components of cost for the business?
Yeah, so great question. I think I'd mentioned at scale, we think we're producing kind of 70% gross profit or 70% gross margin. And so in that 30% of that 100 million or $30 million or so, that's the incident review center. That's some portion of our customer success organization. That's some amount of depreciation and amortization from all the infrastructure that we're deploying out in the field to help kind of create the service. And it's also the wireless charges that we pay AT&T and Verizon, because these sensors are standalone sensors, but they are connected back to the cloud through wireless networks. And now we're increasingly paying a bigger check to Amazon and AWS, where we're hosting all of our infrastructure. So that's what sets up in COGS. Our expenses don't have to grow very much. So although revenue could probably grow, call it 15 to 20% plus CAGR over the next 4+ years, our expenses aren't growing that much because, again, I think I've described on the sales and marketing side, we don't have to boil the ocean for customer discovery. We don't have to grow our sales force significantly to touch and reach customers and convert them on at 30 square miles per sales director per year. That's perfectly fine the way it is. Again, the customer success organization will grow a little bit more, but even then it won't be growing at the same rate of revenue. On the R&D side, same thing. This technology has already been invented. Dr. Bob and his team did a phenomenal job early on. There's a lot of capital that went into the company actually before I joined it. We've got 33 issued patents, really high barriers to entry from a technology point of view. What we do from the outside looking in looks very challenging and difficult. Internally it's very challenging and difficult, and we've solved it. But in terms of what gets presented to the customer, it's pretty simple. It's a dot on a map. And it's not like a big set of features on this thing. It's like, okay, if someone fires a gun, can you reliably put a dot on a map and send that to me in an alert without a lot of false positives, a lot of false negatives? That's done. So we don't have to glom on a lot of extra features or anything like that. So R&D is, it'll grow, but it's not, again, won't grow at 20%. G&A, which is where I live and our CFO lives, just administratively, if we're dealing with another 100+ customers, we just don't have to grow that very much too, because there's a lot of leverage that we have in our G&A. Cost of going public, I mean, we bit the bullet on that already, so that cost is in there. We've got legal, insurance, D&O insurance and the like. So this is an enormously profitable business. Now, you haven't asked a question about what's the knock or skepticism about our business, and I think for a lot of folks, having been a public company now for a couple of years, it's really interesting in that Wall Street, they like companies that go after huge TAM numbers. So I think we talk about our TAM of being $1 billion. Now, we own 100% of the TAM. We don't have any direct competition. That's the thing we just got to get people to understand. They typically want to see, 30, $40 billion TAMs. The reason they have to see those TAMs is because they're often are competitive, right? And so you got to think in terms of market share. Okay, can I capture 20% or 10% of that market, because there's other people who are going to capture another 5% or whatever. So we don't have that. So it's a bit of a pattern recognition thing. And I think people are like, okay, but it's only $1 billion. I'd say, only $1 billion? Are you kidding me? I mean, we don't compete with anybody. I mean, if we can get to $100 million, that's still 10% of the TAM. And I mean, we haven't broken a sweat yet. I mean, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is they like to see growth. They like to see like 30% CAGR growth. And again, the reason they have to see that growth is because a lot of these companies, they're spending so much money below the line and they're not profitable. You grow your way to profitability, right? So I got to see 30% growth, because right now you're losing money. The only way that you stop losing money is you grow out of losing money. So, and and the faster you grow, the less risk there is for the company running out of money, in theory. Our deal is, and again, this is with our philosophy of being long-term greedy, is like, we're perfectly fine. We're not in a race with anybody. We don't have an existential competitive threat of losing market share, because if we grow 15%, it's because the market only grew 15%, because we're the market, we're the entire market. And oh, by the way, we're profitable. So we don't have to grow to be profitable because of our efficiency and leverage. I mean, we're, again, profitable on a $10 million gap quarter. And so that's a bit of a disconnect, I think, for some folks out there that are valuing us a very different way. So I think they're going to get the memo over time, and we'll break down their pattern recognition, and they'll see, and then they'll be geniuses, of course, when they look back and say, oh, I saw this all the time, but
So the other side of that then is, what was the motivation for going public?
So it was very straightforward. So for us, we had some debt. We wanted to deleverage and pay off the debt. So that capital raise helped us do that. It also leveled the playing field in our cap structure, because as I mentioned earlier, prior to my joining the company had raised and invested quite a bit of money, and that was represented in several different levels of preferred. And so for your audience out there, what that means is everybody has slightly different incentives. Series B has a slightly different incentive than B, than C, than D, and with all the tricks that kind of go on with participation and preferences and the like. And so it's hard to create, excuse me, a culture of alignment when you have people having slightly different incentives, including the common holders, of which I would have been one, that if we had been acquired as opposed to going public, $75 million or so would have come off the top before that preferred would come back in participating. So that would basically, mean that if the company had sold for $150 million, technically to the common shareholders, there'd only be $75 million there, because, the participation, or excuse me, the preferences would have taken $75 million off the top. Once we went public, those preferences went away. So we immediately created $75 million of value for common shareholders. We collapsed all the levels of preferred into common. Now we're all on the same page, in it together, literally. Some people always say, hey, we're in it together, until they pull out their term sheet and start looking at, well, my Series A says this. I mean, but now it truly is, we're all together. And I think from a personal point of view, I think being an African-American CEO, to take a company public on NASDAQ was something that was extremely rewarding for me professionally. So those are the three reasons.
Okay. So I just got three more main question areas.
Sure.
How we're doing. I don't want to take too much of your time.
Yeah, no problem.
If I can have about 20, 30 more minutes.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. So the next thing I wanted to ask you about was just in terms of, you mentioned a lot of different activities. You mentioned certainly the R&D, the selling activity, the support activity with the incident review center, all these kinds of things. just on a day-to-day basis and in general, what are the main activity areas, that the company is engaged in? How would you say rank order in terms of what the biggest activities are?
So the first and foremost, it's detecting, locating, and alerting on incidents of gun violence. In fact, in our offices that we've all not been working from since early March, we have one of those ticker things, almost like the old railroad track, railroad station things that flips over that says, these are the number of incidents that are coming in, and here's what we're publishing. So that is ongoing 24/7, 365 days a year. And our customers are relying on us unconditionally to be able to do that. When a gun is fired, publishing that alert within 30 to 45 seconds, not producing false positives and false negatives with very precise, tight location, incredibly important. So that's first and foremost. Right after that, to the extent that we have book deals and we're now trying to expand or initiate service in a new city, we spend a lot of time and energy as a company designing arrays, getting permissions to locate our sensors, and then organizing field sort resources out there, electricians and the like, that climb up on buildings and the like to deploy and install those systems, because that produces revenue and cash and all that stuff. So incredibly important. Longer term, I mean, we have our marketing activities. So we're going to conferences. We're, surveilling the, Twitter feeds and the like, trying to stay up on top of the news, provide leads to the sales organization, which are kind of working through their 12 to 18 month sales cycles with the number of engagements that they have. So that work is ongoing. And then, even though we don't have to grow R&D significantly, we do have an R&D organization. They're continually to work to kind of perfect the system to make it better, cheaper, faster, and the like. And for me personally, along with our CFO, I'm probably spending 25%, maybe as much as 30% of my time talking to existing investors, potential investors, doing road shows with the investment banking firms, talking to analysts and the like. It's I knew it was a lot, but it's actually turned out to be even more than I thought I knew, having been a banker for a number of years and taking companies public. I mean, doing it as a principal is a completely different story. It's a lot of work, and we have to spend a lot of time doing that.
Okay. And so then you also mentioned, I think one of the key, it sounds like one of the key resources in the company is, this patent portfolio, this intellectual property that underpins the technology. What other key resources or secret sauce items would you say the company has?
That's great. Yeah. So I think you're describing our competitive moat, and the kernel really is that intellectual property that's backed up by the 30 plus patents that we have. But I think the next ring around that is equally, if possibly not even more important, is the experience curve advantages that we have, having been doing this now for 20 years and having deployed in over 100 cities, having deployed over 700 plus square miles, seen all manner of different acoustic environments, noisy environments, flat environments, hilly environments, environments with a lot of building density, dealing with salt fog in Boston, wind tunnels in Chicago. I mean, there's, the core technology, and then there's how you apply it to be able to provide a high level of service. And, a lot of it's science, but also a lot of it's art, and it's cumulative art that is represented in kind of tribal knowledge, I would say. So that's incredibly important. And then the next ring around that is our customer relationships and our promoters, our net promoters that are out there. And also incredibly important as well, because I think for a potential entrant to look at our business as, okay, well, let me go to the last ring, is that this $1 billion TAM, which is a big TAM to us, but I think it provides a level of protection from a competitive threat point of view, because it's unlikely, like say a Motorola is example, would try to gear up a competitive threat to only kind of go after something that's a paltry $1 billion market, right? So paltry to them perfectly fine for us. And so that kind of attitude, in a way, kind of protects us to a large degree. So now, if you start kind of breaking down the competitive threat things, it's like, okay, if someone could figure out how to work around our patent portfolio, they still have to figure out how to have their first deployment, they will have deployed none of that. I mean, we have data of over 20 years, so that helps inform our machine classification capability. I mean, we've just got such a huge lead there that even if someone could figure out how to work around our patent portfolio, their first deployment would be kind of messy. And we know that because our first deployments were pretty messy too. We've learned over 20 years how to make them less messy. So their first one's going to be a disaster, which then impacts that third ring of values. Is like, hey, we've got these amazing promoters and relationships where it's very unlikely that, especially as you move through the early majority to the late majority market, which is very conservative and risk averse, like why would they go out on a sheet of ice to go do this new thing that came? I mean, it's just like when everybody else, by then maybe 125 other chiefs have decided to go ShotSpotter. Why are you going to be the chief that decides to go with brand X on their very first deployment? We know what the end of that movie is going to look like. You just wouldn't risk it that way. And so I think then people look at that and say, okay, am I going to, as a potential entrant, right, I've got to spend money to work around the patent portfolio. It's going to take me 12 to 18 months. It took us 4 years, but let's say they're a lot smarter than we are. They could do it in 18 months. Maybe they don't spend $75 million. They got to spend $35 million to get their first deployment to go attack $1 billion TAM market that we're already down the road competing with. Just look at it, just like, it's not worth it. So that's why we feel like and from a valuation point of view, this is incredibly important because our annual recurring revenue that's profitable because of our scale and leverage it's an annuity. I mean, it really is an annuity like no other because it's extraordinarily sticky. We don't have to discount pricing because we don't have competition. We're not going to be losing market share because of competition. Literally, we just have to make sure not to shoot ourselves in the foot. And if we don't do that, if we pay careful attention to not, shoot ourselves in the foot, we've got at least at this point in time, even if we didn't capture another customer, right, which we're not going to do because we have this huge TAM, we're generating $45-50 million a year in revenue. I mean, it's really a beautiful thing. Yeah. And making a difference too. And making a huge difference. And I think all the talented employees, we have about 120 employees. We're all aligned around our mission and purpose. And I think just having this unique perspective on gun violence that's so far ahead of where most people are, because we really do understand it and understand the Pareto aspect of it, understand the underreporting aspect of it, understand the downstream consequences of not having police respond to gun violence in terms of how it creates community distrust and lack of legitimacy, which are all very thematic issues in front of us right now. It's very fulfilling to be on the front part of that. So,
now you alluded to some partnerships before. What would you summarize as some of the most important partnerships that the business has?
Yeah, we certainly rely heavily on our wireless network providers, AT&T and Verizon. Increasingly, we're relying on AWS, Amazon. But I mean, at least with Verizon and AT&T, you've got two different options. I guess in AWS, you have two different options too. So we're not really put at risk. I'd like to be able to say we have to have deep relationships to do what we do, but we really don't, I guess.
What about those community partnerships or governmental partnerships?
Oh yeah, well I think those are those aren't formal. I guess those happen on a case-by-case basis. I mean, we really view them not so much as partners, but as our clients, I guess. I mean, so I didn't capture it that way. They're not a partner, but they're a client. We're there to serve them.
Okay.
Is the way we look at it.
Customer, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You alluded to this group of law enforcement folks, though.
Oh, like Noble and folks I think so. Yeah, those are clients as well, prospect clients and the like. I mean, we do some sponsorship things with Noble as an example, or African American Mayors Association. But again, I think we tend to think of those more as clients. I mean, we might do some sponsorship stuff, but we're really there to serve them and help them achieve their goals. And,
so in terms of business entities that help you accomplish your mission, those are the ones you mentioned, like AWS and
yeah.
So turning to the last thing, just looking at the marketplace forces, the competition, that kind of thing. One thing that strikes me, and I think I might have sent you an email a couple of years ago when some of this stuff was happening, where people were out shooting people on the highway. I can't even remember. There was some different shooting scenario, right?
Yes.
Out in shooting people on the highway, going down the highway in Texas or someplace like that. But anyway, it occurred to me that, we all have an endpoint, right, in our pocket potentially.
Yes.
And then, the whole sales pitch with the Ring doorbell was this neighborhood watch kind of thing where they want to network the cameras and the Ring doorbell.
Yeah.
And have you? Does that have any salience for this audio detection, this gunfire detection? If everybody's walking around the phone, you convince people to put an app on their phone that'll report to you, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I would say we have a freeway project going on right now. So there is that use case. It is real, freeway shootings. We're deployed in some portion of some freeways here in Northern California. So that's a real thing. In terms of the technology, in terms of using cell phones, our sensors are fairly sophisticated. They have a very precise fixed location that's confirmed by a pretty robust GPS chip. That GPS chip gives us a very, very precise location and very, very precise time. Yeah. And we don't have to worry about it moving around or whatever. We know, because we're designing the array, that we can stipulate to a fixed coverage area. But they do cost something. That's to be clear. So, but what they cost is not so much more expensive than potentially getting free cell phones that would not be particularly reliable from a GPS time and location point of view. That scenario doesn't really kind of work for us. And then you introduce spoofing. You don't control the endpoints. It makes it hard to be an enterprise company that says, I'm charging you $70,000 per square mile for this 3 square miles. No ifs, ands, or buts, no false positives, no false negatives. And I'm going to deploy the infrastructure to do that. And asking people to contribute their phones for kind of a crowdsourced thing doesn't work from a sensor point of view. Now, what could be very effective is having those endpoints participate in terms of supplementing the ShotSpotter activation to be able to provide some additional context and information, almost like a digital tip line. And so what we have done is toyed around with the idea. It's like, okay, what if we alerted, while we're alerting police departments to the very precise location, what if we had a broader alert to folks within the community to make them aware of what they're already aware of anyway, but we provide a little bit more context and service, and then give them the opportunity to add on to that particular alert and provide context. Hey, I saw 3 people or this car or whatever. That is really quite interesting. And I don't have any doubt that at some point in time in the future, that would work. With respect to the Ring thing, we'd actually spent some time talking to the folks of Ring. We're kind of doing a bit of a pilot project. I was never a big fan of that, because my sense was that Ring is probably deployed in areas that, like where I live now versus where I grew up. And so, and what we are as a company, in order for us to be successful, we have to be in places where I grew up in Oakland, not where I live in Oakland now. And I don't know, I think, and maybe I shouldn't associate Ring with the other neighborhood watch app thing. I don't know. I just see a lot of like that gets into the over policing model too. It reminds me of, again, where in Oakland, I had to send a message out to one of these neighborhood, digital platforms. I forget what it's even called, but not street.
Like Nextdoor?
Nextdoor, yeah, sorry, Nextdoor. I mean, we've got 4 kids, 3 girls, and my youngest is a boy. He just turned 16. But when he turned 13, sent an email out with his picture. It says, "Oh, by the way,
Oh my goodness.
this is my son right here. So I don't want to be hearing anybody talking about, hey, there's a strange guy in the neighborhood." It's like, there's so much of that nonsense that goes on there. It's really quite upsetting to me, but that's a whole different story. I think, yeah, so that the ring thing kind of smacks to me like that. I think you start getting into the world of over surveillance and stuff that is a little bit tricky. Now, and we probably run out of time, but I do want to mention that, again, how we try to get out in front of some of these issues is, and one of the benefits of being in Oakland, which is such a progressive city, they were like saying, hey, look, as a community, we want to have a right to have input into surveillance technologies that police departments use. And what about the privacy and this, that, and the other associated with these technologies, facial recognition and the like. In fact, they pushed back really hard on facial recognition. So we saw that kind of coming. We said, hey, look, we want to be a ethical company. And again, our customers, although our buying center is the police department, our customers ultimately have to be communities that are accepting of the technology and how police departments are using it. Because if the communities aren't accepting of that, it's not going to have any value for police department. So even though it caused a little bit of friction with our buying center, the police department, we ended up bringing on a outside auditor from the New York University Law School to basically audit our whole privacy posture, our technology from a surveillance point of view, our policies and practices and the like. And we had done a pretty good job already, but they made a couple of recommendations on things we could tweak and put it all together in a very nice presentation. Again, because it was an independent audit firm doing it, it had a lot more credibility to the Privacy Commission in the case of Oakland, which really celebrated us as a company leaning in on this issue and taking the risk to kind of open up the kimono to this outside audit agency to go through that process. And it's really been a badge of honor for us to be super progressive in that light. Because again, we understand that although again, short-term greedy says, hey, I don't care about them, I just want to sell to the police department. It's like long-term greed is like, hey, I want to sell to the police department, but ultimately for police departments to be successful, communities have to embrace and accept this technology. And so we have to answer the privacy question because increasingly people are going to have a say in that. So,
So I guess the last question would be, what do you worry about? If you wake up in a cold sweat at night regarding the business, is there anything out there that concerns you?
I mean, so I'm always, we produced over 140,000 gunshots in 2019. And the thing that keeps me up is that one gunshot that we miss. And we're going to miss gunshots. It's not a perfect system, but I mean, what keeps me up is like missing like a super high profile gunshot where we were deployed. So for example, if we were in, I don't know, Las Vegas or something like that, and they had like a horrific mass shooting where the shooting took place outdoors, and there are a lot of casualties, maybe, and a ShotSpotter alert could have gotten police officers and first responders there to be able to save a few lives or something like that. I mean, missing something like that would be the thing that kind of keeps me up at night. So,
well, did I miss anything? Is there anything else about the business that you want to relate?
No. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and always enjoyed chatting with you. And thanks so much for reaching back out. I hope you guys find this useful.
I'm sure the students will find it very useful. And so often people think of urban-focused businesses as some small, under-resourced, not-for-profit, kind of thing. And I think the way that we change the game is we build these businesses that are actually improving the quality of life in urban areas, but are also sustainable and scalable. And again, I think that's what you've done. So
thank you.